So I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's the Standing Committee meeting of June 9th, 2020. It is 4 p.m. Welcome, everybody. Adoption of the agenda. Council, any deletions or additions? Seeing shaking heads. Councillor Nelson.
I'd like to seek consensus to remove the personnel item under governance. It was something I had sent to the agenda prep committee, and there's no intention of it being an in-camera item. So I have no need to discuss it in camera. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Nelson. Any other council? All right, administration.
No changes from administration.
All right, so I'd like to move, or someone want to move then, please? Oh, Ryan, sorry, Councillor Magoon.
No worries. I'd like to move that we adopt the agenda as amended for June 9th, 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just procedurally, I think Councillor Nelson asked for consensus to have an item removed.
Okay, we could do that.
If I can.
You sure?
I know this is awkward that we're not in a regular meeting. Normally, I would ask to go in camera to discuss why the request is being made to remove. We can't really do that right now, so I'm a little unsure, and I personally think it should stay on the agenda. We can address it when we get to that point, and if it's irrelevant or inappropriate, we can simply move on at that point.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Mayor Michaels.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. If, to my knowledge, we've called the meeting to order, we can go in camera. I'm not saying that that's the appetite of council, but to my knowledge, we could go in camera and discuss that now in order to approve a motion to adopt it. So if there is an appetite, I could support doing that. So just throwing it out there, or if administration has any, I guess, comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, if I could speak to it, during the governance part, anybody can bring up whatever. I just don't want to, not waste is the wrong word, but I don't think it's really appropriate to ask for the same thing as a discussion item a second time. Then it basically goes to a notice of motion. So I kind of don't want to toss away my opportunity for a discussion item on something that I had no intentions, and nothing that was under the scope of the discussion item as I had thought would have been in camera. So that's really the basis of why I'd rather not have it on there. So.
Council. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, I'm in favor of Mayor Michael's comment. It's just that now in the Zoom era, it makes it more difficult to go in camera and then come back out is my only concern. I'm perfectly okay with moving in camera and then coming back out if we need to.
Okay. All right, Councillor Waugh.
I guess my question would be to admin or the rest of council. If this was brought up at Councillor Nelson's behest and he's requesting to have it removed from the agenda, I don't know what the complication is, unless there's something else there's another reason that it's on there.
CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to speak to a couple of points, it was added at the request of Councillor Nelson, though it did seem like other councillors did wish to speak about the same item. They did not request to have it added to the agenda. That was Councillor Nelson. So, and just to speak to the, I guess the procedure, Zoom does make it a little bit challenging. That said, we could, look to admin to support providing a second link for an in-camera conversation to happen right away. I'm just gonna look at my phone. we may need to just take a minute or two break to put those pieces in place if council wishes to have that discussion. It can be supported. It might just take a minute to get those logistics in place to do so.
If I may, I have a question. We do have that second portion with a different Zoom. If we were to use that, do we lose it? Jay Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't lose it. I'm not sure if it's active for, I believe it's set for 6. I would just have to check with Mr. Jaworski to make sure that that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nope, understandable. Mayor Michaels?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to bring clarification, I guess, to Councillor Waugh's point, which I thought was a good question for clarity. When a councillor brings forward an item to be on the agenda, they don't dictate whether it's in camera or not. We go with the recommendation from administration on whether it's protected by FOIA. And then it comes forward this way. Now, if there's a will of council to change that, then we have the discussion to change it and perhaps bring this outside of in camera. But like I said, no councillor owns that. They cannot say this comes in camera only. That's at the discretion of administration to put that, and then we debate it. If we want to take that risk, we can do so. So I'm just throwing that there to Councillor Waugh's sort of question that was the rationale. It goes on the agenda, but then administration and the committee decides, okay, that's fine. It'll be in camera unless council exercises its right to make a motion to change that right now. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Magoon? You're on mute, buddy.
You know what? I did so good last week.
You did.
Thanks. I apologize for that. No, I think what I'd like to do is withdraw my motion. I've heard enough councillors say that they would just like a little clarification in camera. Seeing as it was listed as an in-camera item, I think it's most appropriate. I think if we were all meeting together in standing committee right now physically, it would be something that we'd be very willing to do. I think it's not something we should be afraid of doing just because there's the technological side of it. Let's make sure we do things right. Let's go discuss it, see what where we're at with it, and then come back and out of camera, please.
I have myself and then Councillor Stashik. We have, I think, breakout rooms. I don't know how to work them, but Wendy maybe or someone, but I think you can break out into a breakout room. Councillor Stashik?
Yeah, thank you again, Mr. Chair. So the reason for asking for some discussion about what this item is, it's not detailed on the agenda what this discussion is even about in either the open meeting agenda or the in-camera agenda. So I'm maybe at a bit of a disadvantage here that I don't know what this discussion is even about. I'm assuming some other councillors are in the same boat, and that's why I would like to discuss it in camera to figure out what it's even about and how to proceed with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. C.A. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've just gotten a text message from Mr. Jaworski. A second Zoom meeting has been set up for just council and myself. We can log off this Zoom meeting and seek for those in the room, seek a quiet place and then log on. There's an email invite that has been sent out to council and myself. So we're permitted to go in council using that at any time.
All right. Thank you, C. Olson. Thank you, Mr. Josh. All right, council. Mayor Michaels.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to go.
Okay, motion is made to go on camera. All those in favor? All right, and that is carried. So we'll leave this meeting and rejoin on the email invite that Josh sent us. Thank you.
Thanks.
You guys will have to go out of this room to do it because, okay. We have to stay here. It's just because the audio here will stay on our open meeting.
Yeah, we'll pop into the mayor's office. You guys can see.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry to you guys too.
She can't come in. streaming's on. Told me, little message came up. Just came up and it said,
Which invite do we use?
the original one.
The original one. Oh.
We haven't left. We
All right, sorry, everybody. I had too many invites and grabbed the wrong one. Okay.
By yourself?
What's that?
Said you were sitting all by yourself in the other one?
Yeah, I was, well, they wouldn't even let me open it still. All right, is everybody back with us? All right, so back to, we have, I believe, a motion on the table, or did you pull that, Councillor Magoon? You did, okay.
Yeah,
so-
I pulled it, Mr. Chair. If it's okay, I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Magoon.
I would like to move that we approve the agenda for June 9th, 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Nelson.
Procedurally, I think there's still the consensus up there to remove the one item, I think.
Okay. Was that on?
I'm not sure, Mr. Chair. I don't, from what I understand, there's a consensus. That was a casual one, and then Councillor Ostashik requested that we deal with it, but it's still just out there, I think.
All right, Councillor Ostashik, I see you nodding your head. So we'll first deal with the consensus of that. So we're looking for consensus to remove the item from in-camera governance, the personnel under section 24 of FOIP. Correct? All right. So all those in favor? All those opposed? I see that it has defeated. Right?
Was it Mayor Michaels, Councillor Watt, and Councillor Nelson?
It was 4, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a bit hard, so I'll just help you out.
All right, so we've dealt with that consensus. Councillor Magoon?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move that we adopt the agenda for June 9th, 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. All right, so all those in favor adopting the standing committee agenda for June 9th, 2020? All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, and thank you to everyone joining us for your patience on that. So we're going to move on now to delegations and presentations. So first on the block, we have Hinton Golf Club Annual Budget Plan 2020, presented by Kyle Crawford. Now, is this the one we're moving into the other, or this is public? Sorry, I'm looking for clarification. Oh, there you are, Councilor. Sorry, I see you, Olson. Couldn't find you in all the.
Pretty much squares, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a public delegation to council, so we're.
All right, that's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. Okay, all right, I'll hand it over then to Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councillor and Chair. Yeah, I got a presentation for you guys today regarding the annual budget for the Hinton Golf Club. For you guys that don't know me, I've been in the golf business now for just over 20 years. I've worked at 2 previous golf facilities, one in Sherwood Park called Broadmoor Golf Course, and then the other, I worked for Radiant Golf Group under Mr. Shaw, who owned Shaw Cable. Then we ended up selling to Eagle Quest, so I worked with each kind of group for about a year. And yeah, that's basically it. So I can get right into the presentation.
Please do.
Is the presentation going to come up on my screen, or?
That would be on your, like, you would have to put it up on there. We have each our individual ones.
I gotcha.
We also have it in the agenda.
Yeah, Janice, to pull it up.
Okay.
But I'll need a second. Sorry, I didn't.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just for everybody watching, we just need a second to pull up the presentation. Apologies, it'll just take a minute. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Looks like we got it.
All right, so this is the Hinton Golf Club annual budget plan for 2020. The next slide, please. So our mission statement is to track and measure performance daily, striving to exceed all previous standards, rewarding the customer with an amazing golf course and service-orientated facility. The golf operations plan, the focus for 2020 will be increasing the number of rounds as well as the food and beverage side on a monthly basis, providing excellent customer service and a high degree of satisfaction with their golf experience as measured through customer feedback, staff observations, and social media engagement. So just kind of to elaborate, on the mission statement is we are tracking everything all the way up to every hour that we are open for business. So we track rounds on an hourly basis, food and beverage revenue, cart revenue, wages. Everything is now basically in an Excel sheet that we are tracking that I then put into KPI, which is a key performance indicator report that I send out to the board members. That gives us a daily percentage of where we are relative to our budget that we have created for 2020. So we are able to, if an area starts to get a little bit high, we know how to dial it back, and we can catch problems right away instead of catching these problems months later. Next slide. Going into the expenses, next slide. So we have 4 keys that total our expenses. So we have our maintenance, general administration, pro shop, and food and beverage, totaling that number. Next slide. So the first line you'll see total clubhouse expenses. You'll see the 2019 actuals and then the projected 2020. What you'll notice on the first line in the clubhouse expense is that it basically doubled, and that is because we are fully operational this year, and we're doing everything in-house on the restaurant side of things. The restaurant, we rebranded it, not just a restaurant that's part of the Hinton Golf Club, but as its own entity as Tano Bar and Grill. So those expenses obviously have increased. One of the major factors on the expense side in the clubhouse is we did have certain items that we did have to fix to bring up to code and to make sure that they passed health and safety procedures. So we had coolers, we had grease traps that were all cleaned out, hood vents. So that's why that expense is there. Moving on to the maintenance side of things, $262,000 was used in 2019. We have dropped that around $30,000, and that was based on we did cut some wages back due to COVID-19 We still had snow on the property, so we did go with a layoff for a few staff, which is why we were able to get a little bit lower of a projected expense in that category. Total pro shop expense, it's a little bit less than 2019, and this is strictly just in wages is where we're basically seeing the savings in that area. The total general and administration expense, you'll notice that it was substantial in 2019. One of the key things about that is the management, or you can see my wages were actually in the general expense, where now they are in the pro shop expense category. So that's where you kind of see a little bit of difference in that category as well. But we did make deals with kind of every vendor that we deal with. So for instance, TELUS, and we were able to cut some of these costs drastically by just phoning every company that we deal with and basically make deals with them moving forward. The total golf course or total golf cart expense, you'll notice that it's just slightly higher than 2019. In 2019, they did defer 3 payments. And again, this year, we did defer another 3 payments just on the basis of COVID-19. We do have 12 payments remaining on the golf carts. And each cart payment each month is roughly around $12,300. Next slide. So I've kind of highlighted the maintenance part of the budget, and this is really what ends up either making or breaking a golf course. Is all these expenses could get out of line if you're not tracking it on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. That one budgeted number that we just covered, it was maintenance, was 230. There was just a slight error. That is going to be the total expense at 237,000. And the reason for that increase is we allotted $5,000 for course improvements this year. We don't think we're going to maybe reach 5,000, but it's in there anyway. So nothing really stands out other than we did drop some of the wages. We do have 2 less people on staff than we do last year. And that's just trying to make sure that we are somewhat profitable this year moving forward. Next slide, please. So these are some key points of revenue. Next slide, please. So these are our revenue streams that we deal with at the golf course. We have memberships and leagues. Memberships right now have been pretty much the same as last year. League registrations are definitely down, and that's just due to the restrictions that COVID-19 had in place. Green fees, we did project an increase in this. And then we also have golf carts, pro shop merchandise, driving range, club storage, building and equipment rentals, miscellaneous, food and liquor, and revenue potential are all of our revenue streams. Next slide, please. So these are some of the revenue potential that I was dealing with prior to COVID-19. We do have the luxury of having a very nice building that does have some extra space. So we were looking at putting some lease opportunities in the building to help us kind of get revenue positive. Unfortunately, due to COVID, those lease opportunities never went through. We did do a little partnering with Jasper Golf Course because they were closed all the way up to June 1st due to COVID-19. We generated about $2,300 by having some of their members and some of the public come play our facility prior to them opening. One of the huge things that I've done at prior facilities is have music and comedy nights. This boosts food and beverage revenues, as well as makes a special night for the public and members to enjoy. Obviously, this got affected by COVID-19 as well. Next slide. here are the revenue streams and the revenues for 2020. What you'll notice is the membership / league registration is down, and that's solely based on the league registrations. We could only accept certain amounts due to COVID-19, but we are projecting more green fee revenue than last year, and that's just due to solely our marketing budget. And then I think COVID-19 is helping that aspect to help us attain that goal as well. Golf carts are slightly down just because we're seeing more people walk because they've been kind of put in their house for the last couple months. So it's relatively the same. Pro shop merchandise, we did project a little bit lower here, and that's solely based on we didn't know the guidelines that were going to come in effect, if we were allowed to open our golf shops, if we were even allowed to have clothing or anything of that nature. So that number could increase due to being phase 2 opening up today. Driving range, club storage, pretty much relative to 2019. And then you'll see food and liquor. We're projecting a huge jump in that because we're totally fully operational with having Pano Bar and Grill. So our revenue is going to increase a little bit over 2019, and our expenses have dropped as well from 2019. Next slide. So these are the actual revenue and expenses. We're projecting just a little over $8,000 in profit this year. Obviously, when you're running a golf course, you know, something can jump out on you. We don't expect any big kind of expenses heading our way. As of yet, everything looks pretty good, and we're pretty confident that we can reach that goal of $8,000 in profit. Next slide. And just to finish it up here, the 2 logos that will be used through our marketing campaign throughout the year: Pano Bar and Grill, and then obviously the Hinton Golf Club. So that's basically the presentation. If you guys got any questions, I'm all ears.
All right. Okay, got everybody back. Council, any questions then? Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Any questions for Mr. Crawford? Councilor Magoon.
No question, actually. I want to say thanks to a whole bunch of people. Mr. Crawford, Miss Wade, for putting together this plan that has had to change and adapt and deal with, you know, provincial regulations and COVID issues. And of course, the hard work of the board in being a part of this as well. It's taken a lot of people to make all this come together. And I mean, for a season where we weren't even sure we were going to have golf in the first place, it feels really good to be where we are. And I know that's just due to a whole bunch of people who are not me doing a lot of really good work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Magoon. Council. Well, I just want to, you know, I've heard nothing but good things so far, you know, and the hard work that the board has put into it, and Mr. Crawford as well. So I really appreciate that. And hats off to you too. I understand on June 11th is the kickoff to, you know, first for essential workers to go do some golfing, get themselves, I believe, some hamburgers and hot dogs and things like that, to get an opportunity to partake in some of the food that the restaurant is going to be providing as well. So I really want to thank you guys for offering that and taking that opportunity. So, Councilor Magoon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, and this is a question that I've cheated. I already know the answer to because I've talked to Mr. Crawford and I've talked to our CAO. But it was brought up to me by a citizen, and it's an excellent point. And they had asked about the federal wage subsidy and how that applies to perhaps the golf course. And again, I'm all about free money. So I did forward it on that question to both Mr. Crawford and Ms. Olson, our CAO. And just to confirm for anybody who might be watching, we are just simply not eligible for that given the state of things with the municipality being involved. That was essentially the summary of the answer I got. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we were taking town monies and using it to and using it, so we didn't apply. And the other thing too that was one of their restrictions was that we could actually show a substantial loss in revenue. And due to the golf course still having snow basically all the way up to May, really didn't change our revenue streams unless we were open April 1st. Then we could have possibly have shown that we lost some revenue, but I didn't feel comfortable trying to kind of work the numbers to get some subsidy where I wasn't comfortable in portraying anything that I didn't see validation for.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Crawford, I want to thank you very much for your presentation. I think the golf course is very important to our little town. Just need to confirm on Thursday, is that strictly for frontline workers or is the public invited?
So we're not gonna enforce or ask where you've worked. It's kind of just like golf. It's on the honor system. It's for families that are affected by the pandemic that might not maybe have the opportunity to take their family out golfing. And then as well as for frontline workers that have got us through this tough time. It's open to everyone. We're not going to ask any questions. So that's kind of how we've advertised it.
I will see you Thursday then.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Grace. All right, any other questions? Mayor Michaels.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, nice meeting you, Mr. Crawford. And needless to say, I know other people mentioned it. Thank you to many people, including the board, yourself, administration. It's been quite the journey in the last few years. Before I ask my question, big thank you on the creativity. I think this special day on Thursday is sort of the new beginning of approaching this from I don't even know what word to use, from a even stronger community perspective is what I believe this golf course is all about. So big thank you for that. That is, I think, indicative of where we're going. My question is from a capacity standpoint. I've had many conversations in the past of where we're running at a capacity level for the golf course, and what is your projection or your goal sort of in the medium to long term for capacity in getting people to the golf course?
So right now, because we've added a new system in place that is going to track a lot of this info that we're gathering so that we can kind of gear our marketing to try to really get rounds and people on our property so all of our revenue streams exceed. Right now, we're just on the very tip of it of trying to find out this information. So I would have better information for you, considering we've only been open just basically a month. So we don't know if the data is a little bit skewed in certain areas. But we will find this out at the 3-month mark. And I hear that you guys do want the budget for 2021, so we'll definitely have all that information for you as soon as possible.
Thank you very much.
I guess I do have also one question. I noticed you've got a partnership with the Jasper golf course. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what that is? And because that's something new that the golf course is offering, correct? A partnership there?
It not in a total. Basically, what happened last year is Jasper offered all of our members a 30% discount on their green fee, where we then offered 50% discount for all the Jasper members. I switched the deal to just 30% because if they're only giving 30%, I thought that it was fair for us to only give 30%. And so we came agreement on that. There is some work that we're looking at right now, is actually partnering both golf courses on a 2-round package deal for a certain price. So you'll be able to play either Jasper Hinton or Hinton Jasper, depending on your travels, and we'll hopefully see some revenue that way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. So council, any other questions for Mr. Crawford? All right, well, thank you, Mr. Crawford, for your presentation. Looking forward to what the year looks like and hearing more from, I know Councillor Magoon always keeps us up to date on all the different things and goings on there. So thank you very much for that, and to the board as well for joining us, Brad and Howard. Thank you again for joining us today as well. So
thank you. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome. All right, so then we're going to move on to our action items then, correct? All right, so first action item we have is COVID-19 financial, staffing, and service impacts. CA Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic, it escalated quickly, required a quick response on many fronts to mitigate the impacts to safety, manage service levels for the organization, the community, and to manage our budgets as well. Measures that were taken were operational decisions, and then as well the Emergency Operations Center's role in managing the municipal response. During this time at the senior leadership level, we began to have discussions on business continuity to ensure that we had an understanding of what our essential or core services were. At the same time, we were having that conversation at the EOC level as well. And that was in the event that further reductions were needed to our service levels in order to protect the municipality, protect our staff, and those sorts of considerations. In March, during budget deliberations, Council did provide some direction to administration to implement cost mitigation strategies within the 2020 operating budget to offset ongoing financial impacts of the pandemic. And at that time, we really didn't know what was in store. But administration took that direction and began making decisions related to our budget to try and offset what was possible. This report is meant to provide Council an overview of what was achieved from March 13th to May 31st, and then as well a projection of where the town may sit at the end of August. There are some unknown impacts and assumptions that we had made through the creation of this report and the creation of those projections, which included when the recreation and community centers may open, which, as we've heard from the province, sooner than anyone could have anticipated, I suppose. So at this time, to clarify, we haven't had time as administration, as a senior leadership group, to meet and discuss those impacts and how that might even impact the information we're bringing forward tonight. Understanding that there was no indication before today that rec centers would be permitted to open even before the fall. So though we weren't kind of waiting and ignoring the fact that we would eventually be able to open, we're not in a position to open the doors on Friday. We need to get together as a group and make sure that whatever we're doing, whatever we're putting in place, takes into account community safety, follows provincial guidelines which haven't been established yet or shared with municipalities, and then as well ensures that we have adequate time to prepare the facility for reopening, regardless of any safety protocols and cleaning protocols that we need to put in place. There is some lead time that's needed in order to even prepare the facility to receive residents and individuals to use the pool and arenas. So, so just to let you know, we are planning to meet and discuss that. That's not something that we're able to answer any questions on tonight, unfortunately. So, I can take your question from Councillor Magoon.
Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, thanks. So I apologize because, like everybody else, I think it was a matter of listening to the Premier and the provincial release late this afternoon that got me thinking about tonight's agenda and thinking about the recommendation from admin between either accepting the report for information or tabling the report. So before we get too deep down the rabbit hole, I guess my question for admin is, understanding the announcement that was made today, would you change administration's recommendation from accepting the report for information to tabling the report for information and giving administration some time to work on the relaunch strategy of our various facilities and how that might impact our financials? And I apologize. Again, I had no time to formulate that question and give you any kind of lead time. And I certainly appreciate the work that admin did in preparing the report for today. But I mean, context is king, right? So yeah.
Yeah, CEO Olson, go ahead.
So if it's all right, Mr. Chair, to respond to Councillor McGowan, I do think there's merit in reviewing the report. I know that some things can change. We need to prepare that information and bring it to council separately. But I think for phase one, that information from March 13th to May 31st wouldn't change. It's really looking at the I guess June 15th to August 31st portion of that. And administration will be prepared to bring information to council, as we may need to seek some council direction on what to do and how to prioritize that reopening. So if council is comfortable, again, I would put it to council. If there's a desire to table that's okay, but I think there's still information within the report that we can discuss tonight as well. So.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Any other questions, council, before we continue? Councillor Nelson.
Sorry, and we were talking about ranks. One of the questions I had in the ComServe document that came out a little over a week ago, it said no decision on ICE would be made until September 1st. But subsequently, I've heard quite a few different things, and understand that pretty much anybody that rents that ICE would need to know far before September whether we'll have ICE. Just curious if you could shed some light on not necessarily when the ICE would go in, but when that decision would be made.
CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I may defer to Ms. Howard to assist in answering that, knowing now that that even that date has changed or potentially could change. We need to have those discussions through administration. And then just further to that, if we are getting into questions now, I did have a couple other things that I wanted to touch on. If council wishes to just jump in and start answering questions, that's absolutely okay. But if there's a desire to kind of work through some of the key points that I would want to touch on, I can do that as well. So I'll put that to you. Yeah.
If I may, I wanted to Councillor Magoons if there was any other questions on that, but Councillor Nelson, you had your hand up?
Yeah, happy to leave that till the end.
Yeah, I think we can go on with it, and then we'll, any questions go from there. So continue on, Councillor or CEO Olson.
Thank you, and thank you to Councillor Nelson. We'll circle back on that at the end. And finally, just a few things to touch on within the report to highlight. The other assumptions and unknowns that we were working with include our cash flow through the tax and utility deferments, as well Yellowhead County's ability to honor their agreements. We won't know that they won't know until later on in the year, as well as the potential for a second wave of the pandemic that may require closures in the same vein that we saw before, if not potentially further. And then as well, council approved reductions that may need to happen in response to financial impacts through a second wave. So there are a lot that we don't know. We've done our best with what we do know and the assumptions that we have made in order to present some context and some information to council to help you understand how we've approached this and how we've interpreted council's direction from March. So overall, administration's has mitigated the financial impacts to the operating budget. As you'll see in the report, it's come pretty close. That was through some really hard work and tough decision making of administration, but also looking at how to minimize impacts to the public as far as our service levels go. So adjustments were made due to uncontrollable restrictions that came from mandatory facility closures, which then resulted in uncontrollable cancellations of programs and services in the rec center and through FCSS. This reduced revenues from those programs and the patrons of the facility, but through the closure of the facility itself, so through the closure of the rec center, there were some payroll savings and some other program-related savings that we were able to see through that. So again, adjustments were made in response to those financial impacts. The budgets were reduced where we could to reduce the effects of those losses and increased expenditures. So as you'll see in the spreadsheet that was attached, these included travel and training budgets, so some reductions about to 75% to those across the board for the whole organization, as well as memberships, and then some cancellations of projects or events that were funded through the operating budget. So that include the Go Girl conference, the development officer conference, and then as well the review and update to the website. To touch on a couple examples. Another piece I wanted to highlight through the report were the temporary layoffs that were issued, and that the majority were seen in the recreation center and FCSS. Administration did try to keep people employed as long as possible in order to get a jump on some of the projects and maintenance work that we would normally do at different times in the year. So there was some thought and prioritization of that in order to offset future impacts, I guess, to the facilities and closures of pieces within those facilities. So we also saw a short-term time frame for temporary layoffs in parks. Seasonal positions for parks laborer roles have opened, and they were extended to employees that were eligible to bump into those roles if they were on temporary layoff based on seniority. And then as well, we went beyond that obligation through the collective agreement and extended that opportunity to those who were unable to bump, and saw a couple of employees accept through that opportunity. So that was positive. As well, I mentioned that we did take measures to try and maintain as much as possible the current level of service aside from those uncontrollable areas, and mitigate that impact to the community where we could. So I guess really the items that I wanted to touch on. I guess the last bit here is that to explain where this report fits into the additional information that council will receive on our financial position. Administration made the purposeful decision to separate our COVID conversation from our year-to-date actual financial statements, which will be coming on July 7th, and then as well an update to our capital plan. Some of these things need either council direction or approval. So separating those out to ensure that we have time and focus on those areas to seek some direction from council on those. So July 7th is the date that we are looking to present those. But I wanted to be clear that that was a purposeful decision so we could focus on decisions made around COVID and on our cost mitigating strategies through that motion from council. At this time, there's no recommended action item for this report other than to accept for information. I do have some senior leadership team members here, as well as Ms. Fox, to assist in answering some questions. And at this point, I'll turn it over to council, and we will do our best to answer and provide clarification where it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you, C. Olson. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honestly, I don't have a question. I just want to first express my appreciation, starting with administration, for having to go through what I can only imagine is an incredibly difficult process. To look at $420-some thousand and say, okay, we've got to cut this back, and we know it's going to impact the people that we work with and their families. That's tough. That's hard. And for those people who've worked for the town, who've had to suffer cutbacks specifically to their positions or hours that they work. Again, I have nothing but sympathy and empathy. That's brutal, right? This is just one of those ugly situations where we can do one of two things, and we've seen the best of both worlds in our community. we can come together and we can say, man, this is tough and we're going to deal with it as best we can, or we can try and nitpick and use it against each other. And I'm just proud of the work everybody's done because it's tough and it calls us to be better people. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Nelson?
Yeah, just circling back on timing for the putting ice in the rink. Again, the ComServe showed that the decision wouldn't happen before September 1st, which has caused a bit of confusion and a bit of concern from the different user groups. So just any sort of insider clarification would be great.
C. Olson.
Thanks. So, and thanks for bringing that background. I will defer to Ms. Howard to provide a bit of context for the ComServe. And so for those watching that maybe don't know that ComServe is some communications that are coming out of the Community Services Division. It was felt that though we've done a great job of communicating to the public from an organizational standpoint, some more detailed information on those facilities and programs were needed by the community. So that was in response to a community need. But I'll ask Ms. Howard to provide some clarification.
Thank you. Yes, so there has been clear messaging that says there will be no summer ice. We have contacted all of our user groups and had conversations with them so they understand clearly that there will be no summer ice. And that decision was made based on the anticipation that the rec centers were not going to be even considered until phase 3 and that there was no date for phase 3. So the wording to say that there's no decision will be made about ice until September 1st means that there will be no ice before then. And if we do want to have ice for September 1st, then that changes the information we've provided council tonight because I've got to bring staff back and we've got to start building ice and we've got to pull people out of parks, and that changes our plan for parks that we've created as well for COVID. So it certainly sets a few things in motion, not that it can't be done, but before the announcement that came out a few hours ago, that was our plan, and that's what it was based on what we knew and what we didn't know. So yes, we have confirmed that there is no ice, no summer ice, and we were going to decide when to put ice in based on the announcements from the province and our capacity staff-wise, and considering that our parks team is also our arenas team.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of want to jump in quick because it leads into another question I had. I think it's pages 94 of 105, it talks about community services, parks, recreation, culture, and then it breaks it down more specific into aquatic, and then more specific into parks and arena. And one of my thoughts was parks and arena are together because the same staff cross over. But I was just wondering what falls within each of those three categories.
C. Olson.
Thanks. Again, I'll defer to Ms. Howarth to explain the breakdown, and as well, apologies, I asked for some additional water for my tea. Ms. Hope is here too. If there's anything that she can provide, I'd be happy to let her.
Thank you.
There's
Thanks. Sorry, can you just give me a page number on that again?
94 of 105.
94, 105.
And 92 of 105, I think, as well.
All right. Oh, yes. Okay. So the orange chart.
Yeah.
Okay. And your question is the breaking out of, okay. So the parks, so the community services, parks, rec, and culture is all of your admin team. So that's including customer service clerks and our general recreation team, center team that doesn't specifically get budgeted under aquatics or arena and parks. So that's the short answer. Does that?
Yeah, I think it makes sense in your comments earlier about deferring the installation because your arena staff are also your park staff answered kind of the other part of that question. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask only because it was mentioned within the report with regards to the $240,000 emergency response reserve. What are the thoughts at this time? Is administration going to have to dip into that reserve at all with the work that's been done?
C. Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Councillor Waugh. At this time, at the time that the report was written, there was no intention of coming forward with an ask at this point. Again, we do have uncontrollables, right? The Yellowhead County cost sharing agreements and the tax and utility deferrals. And we really wanted to leave that emergency reserve for emergencies, for things that we could not foresee. So at this point, that's not something that we were seeking council support on its use at this point. Administration is also preparing to bring an updated report. And again, circumstances have changed, but at the beginning of September, to show some actuals and to take a look at the next couple of months and show council where we landed. And at that point, if there was any need or any additional information that we've received that would support the use of that, we would bring that forward for council's discussion and potential approval. At this point, this isn't something that we are anticipating. And again, we'll be bringing further information forward on the reopening of the rec center and what those impacts could be, and how that changes what you see here today.
If I could, I'd thank administration for the obvious tough decisions and the hard work that's been done to maintain the bottom line to this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Questions for this action item? Councillor Waugh?
I'll jump in one more time, I guess. I was curious about, we were talking about the rec center. Usually there's a prolonged maintenance period for the pool that usually happens in September. Had there been any consideration given to moving that ahead into the summer if possible? And I guess with the decision today by the province, that how does that impact potential plans?
C. Olson?
Thank you. And as well, I'll defer to Ms. Howarth, as she'll be able to provide the detail and context. But at this, through the extended closure of the rec center, administration did try to prioritize what could be done ahead of time in order to offset the maintenance that might be done later on in the year. So Ms. Howarth, if you would like to kind of take us through that as well.
Ms. Howarth?
Thank you. So yes, when we closed the facility, there's two teams that work on the shutdown of the facility. One is the lifeguard aquatics team, and the other one is our maintenance team through infrastructure services. So we kept our staff on for a few weeks, even though the facility was closed, and to do the shutdown, their shutdown items. And then once they were done theirs, now the maintenance team is in, that's through Mr. Hawk's team, and they're doing some retiling work and all of the things that were listed to be done in September. So we do not anticipate having to shut down in September, but of course we were expecting to be closed a little longer than we are. So I'm quite certain that we're in the middle of some of those projects that now have to be completed, and we would want to complete them while we're closed. That could delay the opening of the pool. But again, we would need 3 weeks from today. If we decided today we wanted to open it, we would need 3 weeks, and that's without finishing up the shutdown items. So that's our plan. We definitely wanted to think ahead so that if we did open up, we didn't have to shut down again. And so that has definitely been anticipated, and the work is being done. And I'm not sure if Mr. Hawk has anything to add from his team. Thank you.
I see him shaking his head, so it doesn't look like it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you covered everything. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Magoon, then thank you, Ms. Howarth.
Yeah, just in short, thanks. That's excellent. Like, it's just nice, right? I think that's gonna make things a lot easier for the community as we transition, hopefully a little bit more back to normal. So thanks for the good thinking.
I just had one question, I guess, for myself, and I was just curious on the deferments. Do we know, like, did people take advantage of that, or because I know that we were saying you could, but encouraging that if you don't have to, and I know there was some high level types of losses potentially, but we know where we're at all with that. Olson?
Thanks. So I can look to Ms. Fox to assist in answering. At this point, I don't believe we have a full understanding of the tax deferments. We're a little bit prior to our typical deadline. I do know that community members, residents, businesses have been reaching out to find out how to pay within our typical deadline. So that's been positive. At this point, through the utility deferrals, that's something I'm not sure of, but Ms. Fox, if you have anything to add, I'd take it away.
All right, thanks, Ms. Olson, through to Councillor Hawes, Chair Hawes. Oh my gosh, I feel like I haven't talked in a long time. Love you. So yeah, as far as the deferrals, there wasn't a big uptake so far on the utility deferrals. A lot of that is still coming in as regular. There's a small portion there. I don't have percentages or statistics, but it wasn't large enough to worry me as far as cash flow. My majority of my concern was around our large industry deferring tax, which a little bit of that did happen. And I do believe people are going to take advantage of the tax deferrals. I do know that lots of us that work here are paying it because we want to make sure we're contributing. But the deferrals themselves, I think, because the deadline is extended to August 31st, we are going to see a larger portion of people deferring the taxes. I will say, though, that there is a steady influx of collections. A majority of our calls are in regards, as Ms. Olson said, to payments and how people can pay. And our administration just did a phenomenal job of making sure that residents and business had lots of options to pay, especially with the facilities being closed. So I encourage anybody that's having those concerns, it's online. If you call in, we do have a lot of alternatives to pay. I think there's also that wild card in there of if there were hardships seen by people, that there might be larger uncollectibles that we haven't seen before, but those have been really hard to anticipate. And the faster recovery will definitely help with that.
Okay, thank you. Because from what I remember, that's a big part of that cash flow that might, to Councillor Waz, about the 240,000. So I appreciate that. It's good to hear that, there is still people that are taking advantage of, keeping those payments going. So thank you. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just need to confirm this. If people have not contacted the town to defer, then it's business as usual, eh? Their taxes are paid the end of June, utilities get paid. Is that correct?
Olson?
Mr. Chair. Yes, that is correct. In order to defer payments, administration must be contacted. There's a lot of information on the process on our website, but as well, if anybody's watching and is curious, to call our town main phone number, and they'll put you through to the person that can help you answer the questions as well.
All right, thanks you, Councillor Olson. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. So just an additional piece, if people were on payment plans, they had to phone to defer because obviously we would have to stop those. If people choose not to pay and they haven't deferred their payments, council has waived penalties at this time. So, the impact of that will be compounding amounts payable without receiving penalties till after August 31st. I just wanted to clarify that. Also, I just have a closing statement, but I want to make sure that council's had their opportunities to ask their questions before I go into that.
Council, any other questions for this action item then? Not seeing any though, Ms. Fox?
Thank you. So I did also want to thank council. I know in the beginning, making the decisions with everything happening, everything was happening really quick. And I wanted to let you know from a financial and administration perspective, what really helped us find the success in the plan and the quick decision making that we did. And I think that council's ability to provide us direction in the beginning fairly quickly on the cost recovery process really allowed the removal of a lot of red tape. So at sometimes I know it possibly felt like communication wasn't as coming as quickly as possible, but because of that decision, administration was really empowered to make a lot of quick decisions that really focused on ensuring the long-term sustainability of the services. And I think that that has helped us to this point. And I just wanted to say thank you from our perspective. That really did help us move forward quickly. And of course, Ms. Olson coming on new and then taking on a pandemic and taking the horse by the reins. It was new for all of us. So we appreciate your patience, and hopefully we're able to bring you the information to help you feel confident in the decisions that were made. And just my final comment would be, I know Councillor Magoon had brought up phase 2 and if there was value in still moving ahead. And I want to point you in the direction of the attachment. You don't have to go there now. I just, what I think what you'd really notice for phase 2 is the recreation center itself, the place most affected by the closures. The expenditures are largely offsetting the revenues. Although I know with starting up, there are going to be some extra costs. But what my point there is that if we start up sooner, the revenues might come in sooner and the expenditures will go up. So hopefully there's not a huge cost impact there, although we know there will be some extra costs higher than the revenues due to just that startup and bringing people back. So I just wanted to give you some comfort there. And again, say thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. All right, council, seeing that if there's no other questions on this action item, is there any appetite for a consensus on the recommendation? Councillor Magoon?
Yes, I'll move that council accept the COVID-19 financial staffing and service level impacts report for information, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. All right, any council, any discussion on this direction? All right, I don't hear anybody. I can't see you, so I'd have to hear you if there is any. If there is none, then Ms. if I could have everybody else on the screen now, please. Thank you. So I'll get this one, the question then. All those in favor that the committee accept street name, or sorry, wrong one. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I jumped the gun. COVID financial staffing and service level impacts report for information. All those in favor? Unanimously. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on to the second action item then, and that is the street name signage engineering design standards. CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I missed this earlier in the meeting. I just want to take a moment to let council know, for those that aren't in the room, we have Ms. Alchargi filling in for Ms. Anderson. She's off at a medical appointment today. So Ms. Alchargi was here for the FCSS in-camera discussion and volunteered to help and fill in. So she's taken us through that portion, and I thank her for stepping up. That's a real team player. So. The street name signage engineering design standards. Prior to previous budget years, Hinton's emergency medical services, our RCMP detachment, and protective services have expressed concern with the standard of street sign that we currently use in Hinton. Issues with the sign that they are having include the non-reflective surface, which makes reading it at night or in bad weather conditions particularly challenging. The issue can impact the response times as well. For our new community members too, and visitors, wayfinding in town can be, for those same reasons, a little bit challenging, especially for those not familiar with the town's layout. Replacement of the neighborhood street signs was included in the budget for 2020, but through the budget process, council did inquire on the look and feel of the signs and had some questions around the design standards. The report that's put forward to you tonight is an information report to help explain some of what's gone into those the design standards that we'll be using for the signs, or we're intending to. Mr. Vanna is also present to answer some of your questions and to give some timeline and an idea of how this project's shaping up as well if you have questions. At this point, Mr. Vanna, if there's anything that you would like to add prior to going to council for their questions, I invite you to share what you need to, and then we'll receive council's questions from there. Thanks.
Thank you, CEO.
Thank you, CEO Elson. I don't have anything else to add to the conversation, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. All right. Thank you. All right, council. Street names, signage. Councillor Race and then Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask you about Google mapping. You know, so when EMS does get a call and they're responding, in our municipality, they do have access to, you know, mapping, wouldn't they?
Olsen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll look to Chief Martins to assist in that. I don't believe they use Google mapping. There's some software that Protective Services do use, but Chief Martins, if you want to give a little context to where those issues are coming from.
Thank you, CEO Olsen, and through to Councillor Race. So we don't use Google Map. We use software that's in our 911 dispatch center, and it's based from input from our town information through like our GIS, and that gets put in. However, the fire side doesn't have mapping in our trucks. That's what we're installing this year. EMS has mapping, but it doesn't come from Yellowhead County. It comes from their own dispatch out of northern Alberta. And RCMP comes from K-Division, and it's different again. So there's 3 different systems. And the issue sometimes isn't just the mapping. The issue is seeing the location that we're going to. So we have a ballpark idea. But the problem is at nighttime when you're going with lights and sirens to a location, you're driving right by residents. You're driving right by locations that you need to respond to. And it's causing confusion when you have 3 or 4 vehicles drive by. So we do have the mapping software, but it's 3 different systems between all 3 departments.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, just a clarification. In the background, it says that in 2019 we approved 140,000, as well as in 2020. But I think later in where it talks about the implications of the decision, it talks about 240,000. Just to confirm that it was 100,000 in 2019 and then 140 in 2020, correct?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The total amount is $240,000.
Thank you.
Okay. Myself, you know, I'm pleased, definitely. You know, I've always had a concern about these signs. Unfortunately, are difficult to see, and also I'm glad to see the height, because I understand looking at that the height of the posts are going to be also improved, because some of them I find are very low. Some people have hedges; they get covered up by the trees and the hedges. So I appreciate that it's not only the signage, but it's also the height of the pole that the signs are going to be on, because I can see that you know, someone who's a non-resident would have a very difficult time. So I definitely appreciate the size and that as well. So thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, just really briefly, I think it's important to note too, I was having a conversation this past weekend about the signage project with a citizen. And please, I'm just looking for administration, if I'm right, of course, to say, yep, as that this is a tendering process. This isn't a, yeah, absolutely, it's going to cost us $240,000 and that's it, not a penny more, not a penny less. The idea is this is what we've budgeted for the project through the tendering process.
Mr. Vanna?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is the budgeted amount. That isn't the actual amount. We are trying to save money as any way we can. So Mr. Hawk is also using internal forces to actually install the signs. But there's only a certain number of companies that we would go out for bids on to actually produce the signs.
C. Olson, you also.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It was really just to echo what Mr. Vanna said. We are looking, and Mr. Hawk can speak to that as well, looking internally for some person power to assist with the installation as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Hawk?
With regards to the height, yes, we will try to bring all the standards that's being recommended here by our engineering company. However, we will at the same time we'll try to save our cost. So some of the cost that currently we have, unless it is very below standard, we will not change some of them. So it will be kind of a customization of, we'll be using some of them, and where it's very, very low, below standard, we will be replacing them. And as Mr. Vanna mentioned, that we will purchase the sign, but the actual work, we will be implementing using our in-house forces. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Building off of Councillor Magoon's portion, if this is a single project to be tendered and being over $200,000, does the process not require it to come to council with a summary of tenders?
Sorry, C. Olson. Yep.
Thank you. I'll look to our senior leadership team to assist in answering that. That wasn't something that I was aware of. It was approved through the budget process. But if there's any context that either Mr. Vanna or Ms. Fox or Mr. Hawk can provide, I'll look to them to help.
Okay. Mr. Vanna?
Mr. Chairman, so past practices have been that we go out for tenders as part of the provincial tendering process. And we seek different vendors to do the work. But before that, council actually approves the budget. So as part of the operating and capital budgets, council will approve the budget. So it doesn't have to come back to council in terms of that. Now, if the costs come in over budget and we have to come to council for additional dollars, then yes, we would have to come back to council to ask for additional dollars and identify where those dollars are coming from. But as part of the budget process, council looks at where the dollars are coming from and approves that. But we still have to go through that whole tendering process.
Thank you, Mr. Vanna.
Would I be able to follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Yeah, just in our purchasing policy, it says in the documentation column, it says do report to council summarizing tenders for anything over $200,000.
Okay. C. Olson.
Thank you. Not to put Ms. Fox on the spot, I know administration's been working through an update to our purchasing policy, and Ms. Fox and as well Mr. Vanna have been supporting that process and are likely more familiar with this area to speak to.
Okay. Ms. Fox?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hawes. In our current purchasing policy, tenders that come in over $200,000 are the tender is to be taken to council for approval under the current purchasing policy.
Okay.
Thank you for that on this point.
All right, council, any other questions for this action item? Councillor Nelson?
I think one of the things that I again think I know the answer to, but I'm not sure. Does this cover every arterial collector and local road in the community? It talks about phase 1 and phase 2, but I'm not sure if there's phase 3 and phase 4. It's a little bit vague as to what all is covered by it.
Or T. Olson, sorry.
I believe maybe Mr. Hawk might be best positioned to answer that, so I'll ask him for his support.
Okay. Mr. Hawk?
And actually, this is one of the reasons that instead of going a full complete tender package, we are going to implement this project in-house because we developed the inventory and we found some community like East Hardesty. We already have the standard sign over there, so we don't need to replace them. So basically, our estimate that using this $240,000, we will be able to replace all the signs. But again, this is just a best estimate. Once we start implementing them, we will know further better.
Perfect. Thank you. I just want to make sure that the 240 was for the entire town, not for just portions of it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, Councillor Magoon.
Actually, I think Councillor Nelson was before me, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, just one last question. As we're all learning this new capital budget part, if this hasn't already been tendered, what is the reason that we are publicly stating the approved budget amount for 2020? Like, you could know the 2019 because the 100,000 was public. But if our goal is to save money through tendering by not having bidders know what our budget is for it, where does this fall into a different category?
Mr. Hawk?
I think in this case, though our intent not to make the budget, individual budget amount public because of the risk of, in the tendering process. So in this case, actually, we will be purchasing only the signs. So in this case, the risk of making this budget dollar, the amount public is, the risk is very, very low or almost none, because we are not completely tendering the entire job.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly understand that this was approved through the budgetary process. I think in hearing a couple of different things tonight regarding our purchasing policy versus the budget, and looking at what the direction, or pardon me, the requested direction from administration is, I guess I'm just asking the rest of council if we might feel more comfortable giving this a week or two to get administration's full recommendation on this. I think this might be one of those times where, rather than rushing to a certain direction, it might be good to make sure that all of our ducks are in a row. I would just feel more comfortable with that. Councillor Nelson brings up a good point regarding our purchasing policy. I would just like to have a really rock solid answer on that. And unless there's any reason why we've got to rifle this through right now, again, I'm just looking for some comfort. That's all.
Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I think, and I'm guessing administration will probably speak to it. It's our purchasing policy probably prevents there being a rock solid answer, because it actually says that council approves over 200,000, which we've already done. But there's just a reporting mechanism that has to come back. So it's a really weird, ambiguous policy that I look forward to when administration has brought it back to us with some clarity, because it's been, I remember in 2019 having a similar conversation, and depending on how you read it, it's different interpretation. And for me personally, I'm fine with where everything is at. understanding if we're not going to get a summary of tenders and that reporting piece, then I might be a little more uncomfortable. And if that's going to come back, I'm not requesting approval because we've already approved it. I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Mr. Vanna?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification here. So the reason the report is here today for council is just simply on council had requested what are the signs going to look like? What's the standard? And so all we really wanted to present to council today was here is the standard. So that if you had any questions about it, then we could certainly answer those questions. If council goes down the path of, you know, what's the purchasing policy and whatever, then that's probably something that we can bring back at a different date and discuss the purchasing policy. After all, I know that Ms. Fox is working on the purchasing policy, and certainly if you know, we're going to follow our current purchasing policy to this point.
Thank you. Councillor Magoon and then Councillor Race.
Yeah, I'm okay. That actually helps me at least a little bit for right now. Thanks for that. I think I'm comfortable certainly accepting this report tonight. Then, based on some of that, I'll feel a lot better once Ms. Fox has had a chance to bring an updated purchasing policy to us and have a little bit more clarification on that particular piece. Again, not a mountain, but just a molehill I'd really like to hammer out.
Okay, CEO Olson, and then Councillor Reese. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I just wanted to speak directly to Councillor Magoon to provide council some assurances that is one of the policies that has been prioritized by administration through you know, issues like this coming up every so often. So it is in draft form. It's going through its review, and it should be to council shortly. So hoping to bring something you know, over the next month or so. And to have further to this discussion, a look at that new purchasing policy. So thank you.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Admin, I hope you haven't spoke to this, and if you have, I apologize. Are you able to speak briefly to what portion of the signage will be done in-house?
Thank you to Councillor Reese. The installation of the signs would be done in-house.
Yeah.
As much as possible.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Okay, Council. So if there's any appetite, I believe that there is a possible option or options for consensus here, if anybody wishes to. Councillor Nelson.
I'd like to direct the committee accept the street name signage engineering design standards report for information. And if I could speak to it, I really appreciate this has been brought back to council prior to the installation starting and a lot of the work happening on them. I think one of the biggest challenges our councils run into is citizens being surprised about something. So this has given us an opportunity to have some of the conversation and have citizens understand what's coming down the pipe in the scope. And I just appreciate it coming back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. I am too happy to see the design of it, the look of it. Also from an asset management, you know, perspective, I think, you know, the material it's going to be made of, the reflectiveness of it, everything, you know, lasts a lot longer than the current ones. Not that the last ones didn't last, I don't know how many years, but they did break down and the reflection of it and everything like that. So I foresee that these are going to last a lot longer as well. So I do appreciate the report and the look at them as well ahead of time. So, right. Is there any other discussion on this before we call the question? I can't see anybody, so if you do, just throw it out there. Oh, thank you, Ms. Altragi. So if there's no other discussion, we'll call the question then that the committee accept the street name signage engineering design standards report for information. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, council. All right, so that wraps up our action items for tonight. We're going to move on to additional information. Is there any urgent matters from council? Councillor Stashik, I'm going to start with you.
Nothing for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Race?
I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Councillor Nelson?
Nothing for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Waugh?
Nothing for me, thank you.
All righty. Councillor Magoon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, and I did send CAO Olson an email about this, and I realized that was just recently. But I think for the public perspective, I just wanted to make sure that it was, recorded. I had received a concern from a citizen about the state of the graveyard in terms of maintenance. Now, I'd only seen pictures, and we know that, again, pictures are not always the most clear thing. Personally, I haven't had a chance to run up there yet, so I just like to pass on that concern to administration that was expressed to me by actually more than one person. It started a bit of a thread, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, C. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Councillor McGowan. And Ms. Howard may be able to provide some additional information here, but as I know, the cemetery is being prioritized as an area to see some improvement and some maintenance work done. That it hasn't started yet. It's something that's been on the work plan, I believe, for this week. But Ms. Howard, if you have anything further to add, if I've missed anything, please jump in.
Ms. Howard?
Thank you. Yes, our parks crew was up there yesterday. Our second team came on board yesterday and has had all their safety training and orientation, and they've spent the rest of the day yesterday and all day today up there working on the garbage cleanup, the grooming around the headstones, the mowing the lawn, and working on some of the grave sites that have sunken in. So that is, they're working on it this week as we speak. So you should see some progress there.
That's great. I guess along this line, and maybe, but I appreciate bringing it up there, but somebody else brought up to me about some of these issues, because when I saw the pictures, Councillor Magoon, I appreciate it, but a lot of dandelions, a lot of weeds, things like that. Someone asked me if we've ever considered wildflowers as an alternative. Apparently, their research shows that wildflowers not only choke out a lot of the weeds, but they also choke out the grass and make things a lot better. Is that ever something that we've ever looked into? I was going to ask this question, but being how Councillor Magoon brought it up in this, is that anything we've ever looked into as a Parks and Recreation to try? Because, we don't spray for weeds, we don't use chemicals for that, but is there any other alternatives to try to minimize that? Councillor, or C. Olson?
Thanks. I'm not sure if administration is prepared to answer that. That's something maybe, I don't know, Ms. Howard, you may have some answers at your fingertips, but at this point.
And I appreciate, I don't mean to have any answers. They threw it out there at me, and I thought it would be an opportunity. If there's any look into that, I'm not making a direction or not. I've never heard of it myself, but apparently they've done it in their yards, and it gets rid of all that, and they don't have to grow their grass much, and they got wildflowers in there. So I don't know. It's just something that somebody brought up to me, and just was curious. That's all. Ms. Howard?
Thank you. Yes, we do. We apparently last year, and I'm getting an update here from Ms. Heather Wave. She was our interim Parks Rec and Culture Manager last summer. And so our Park Supervisor, Chad O'Shannock, did look into that last year. I know we've looked at other options in the past before. And yes, healthy grass will certainly choke out our dandelions, and we don't spray dandelions. We haven't done that for several years. It is just a temporary seasonal thing. But if you'd like to hear the outcome, perhaps Ms. Wade could chime in quickly, seeing we're meandering down that path. It's up to you.
And I mean, it's not an urgent matter, so I just threw it out there because he did. It's not like we have to continue on. If Ms. Way wants to send an email out, that's fine too. So, okay, thank you. We'll keep going here. So Councillor Waugh. Sorry, you moved, the blocks moved, so I can't remember now. So
I have nothing. Thank you, Mr.
nothing.
Chair.
Okay. And Mayor Michaels.
Nothing, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have nothing myself either. So, all right. So we'll move on to then CEO status report. CEO Olsen.
Chair. Not too much to share tonight. Just was made aware of the opportunity now to announce some social services support funding that our community has received. This was some funding that was supported by, or the application process was supported by our FCSS staff, and they submitted a joint application for funding back in March at kind of the forefront of COVID. It was processed, it was approved, and our total ask of just shy of $70,000 was approved. The partners that assisted in making this possible and that will benefit from the funding in our community are the Food Bank, HELP, and then the Hinton Friendship Center as well. So they already know the announcement and the good news, and we were just waiting for the province to give us the go-ahead to announce. So that's something that's really important to our community and to help those organizations that really support some of our most vulnerable in our community. So we thank them for all that they do, and thank you to FCSS for facilitating that application process as well. And that's it for me.
Great, thank you, CEO. And is there anything with legislative services update, CEO Wilson?
I'm not at this time, still looking and reviewing job descriptions and getting ready for that hiring process.
Okay, thank you. And I know that Wendy's not here, but any executive assistance, logistics information that we're aware of?
Not today, thank you.
Temporary? All right. Okay, so that ends the public portion of our agenda. Then if anyone would like to make a motion to go in camera, please, with a 10-minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion to go in camera with the 10-minute break.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. So all those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you, everybody.